All right, we're going to proceed then. Is the state ready to open?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
Your Honor, could I ask that chair be removed to sort of bend
Yes,
away a little bit?
blocks
Thank
your
you.
view there? Yes, sir.
Over the next few days, what you're going to hear in this courtroom is the story of the short life and horrible death of a little boy. A little boy who at the time he died was 18 months old. He was born June 25th, 2022 to his mother, Shayla Garnica, in Tallahassee, Florida. His father was Julian Williams, and Julian knew that Shayla was pregnant, but was expecting the baby to be born the following week. She called him the day after the baby was born and said, "He's here now. He's been born." So Julian Williams went to Tallahassee, and they celebrated the baby, and that talked about what to name him, and agreed to name him Jackson Drew Angelus, which is Shayla's her last name, like her I can't remember what the correct word is, but it's her last name was Angelus Garnica, and so the child was going to be Jackson Drew Angelus. Actually, she didn't do that. She did the birth certificate and she put Romeo Angeles on there. And as it turns out, actually, you'll hear Julian Williams didn't even realize that the child's name was Romeo, as opposed to Jackson Drew, which they had agreed on. Until after he had passed away. But he went by JD. That's what everybody called him. That's what his father called him. That's what his aunt called him. That's what his mother called him. He went by the name, by the initials JD, and he was ultimately solely in the custody of Julian Williams. When the child was 3 or 4 months old, his mother was going to return to Mexico for something, and she contacted Julian and said, that she wanted to know if he had any problem with her taking the child to Mexico. And he said, yeah. He said, I'd rather not. He said, why don't you just leave him with me? And she said, okay. So he went to Tallahassee and he picked up JD and took him back to Colquitt, where he lived. And when he went back to Colquitt with the child, that essentially was the end of the mother's involvement with the child. She saw the child 2 or 3 times after that, like when Julian took the child to Tallahassee to go to a doctor's appointment, whatever, she saw the child then, but she didn't keep him anymore. He didn't stay with her anymore. He lived from that point forward until his death. He lived with Julian Williams. He lived with Julian Williams and Julian's sister, Ashanti Burr, who was a little younger than he is. She's a college student now. And they lived with their mother in Colquitt. Her mother became ill. She was diagnosed with cancer. She was receiving radiation treatment, and the child couldn't be in the home with her because she was receiving radiation treatment. And so she ended up moving to another house that they owned, and so it was Julian Williams and Ashanti, his sister, and the child living there. And Julian was the sole income. He was the sole wage earner, the sole support for the family, for his mother, for his sister, and for the child. And so he worked a lot, and when he was working, his sister was the person who took care of the child, sort of on a day-to-day basis. The mother ended up dying. I don't remember exactly when that was. Sometime in 2023, Julian's mother passed away, and so it was Julian and Ashanti and JD. Whatever the original origin was of the relationship, Julian Williams became involved in a relationship with Trinity Poague, who is the defendant in this case. And she lived in Donalsonville, lived in South Georgia, down, further south. We're in South Georgia. Further South Georgia. When you're in Donalsonville, this is North Georgia practically, where we are. But she was from there. She was from Donalsonville, and she and Julian Williams became involved in a relationship. And you're going to hear some things about the relationship, about as it progressed. And for now, I'm just going to sort of summarize it by saying that what I think you will hear is evidence that the relationship was very rocky, that it was sort of up and down, it was on again, off again. They were breaking up on Thursday and back together on Friday, and then she was going to break up with him on Saturday, and it hurt her feelings because he broke up with her before she could break up with him, and so on and so forth over the course of many, many, many months. Trinity she was a college student. She started attending Georgia Southwestern in August of 2023. And so Julian often, on weekends when he was off work, he often would come up to Americus. He many times brought the child with him to Americus, and they stayed in her dorm, and she lived in the Oaks dormitory. She had a roommate, a young lady named Paris Permort, who you will hear from in this trial. And so Julian would bring the child up, and they would stay with her. They would stay with her there. Throughout all of this, one of the primary sources of friction that you will hear about, the primary sources of friction in this relationship, and what you will hear is this, that Trinity Poague resented this child. She resented this child because the child got more of Julian Williams. Jay goes by Jay. Most people call him Jay Williams, and so if I say Jay or Julian, I'm talking about the same person. I'm talking about the child's father. But the child, JD, got a lot more attention from Jay than Miss Poague did. In addition to that, the evidence will show that she resented the fact that she was sort of placed in a stepmother role, that wasn't the role she wanted to be in, that she wanted to have a family, she wanted to have children, she wanted to have a child or children with Jay Williams, but not that child. She wanted her own child with Jay Williams. And you will see and hear evidence in both in the form of text messages and people who knew Trinity Poague and who had conversations with her, and you'll hear from them about the things that she said, and you'll see some of the text messages that she said, and going all the way back to like August of 2023. She was expressing her anger about the child, her frustration about the child, that commented in a text message to her roommate that she really would just like to punch him, and it's like, well, I know that sounds terrible, because he's just a little boy, but still, I wish I could just punch him. And she makes those references and things like that continue throughout their relationship. So, coming up to the week of January 8th, January 9th of 2024, Jay Williams is here. He comes to America because he's working. He works at he'll tell you, I can't remember the name of the place, but it's in Bainbridge, and they build dams and bridges and things like that. They construct them there and then take them apart and ship them out and put them back together and all that. He's got a good job, and he fully supports this family and has, since even before the child was born. But he would come to America sometimes, and then he'd go to work from here, and then come back to Americus during the weeks. And so he was in Americus for a couple of days and stayed at the dorm with Ms. Poague. And then he got a room here at a hotel, and they were going to have sort of a celebratory night, I suppose. And there was some fighting going on. It was trying to make up, and you'll hear all of that evidence. But the bottom line is that he's here on and off throughout that week. And then Saturday, he leaves here on Friday and goes to work, and he goes home, and so he's in Colquitt, and
If there are phones in the courtroom, they need to be cut off.
I don't know where mine is, so I'm sure it's not mine. So they're there that night on Friday, January 13th. He's there. I'm sorry, it's not Friday. Saturday, January 13th. He's in Colquitt, and she's up here, and she's, somebody comes up with the idea of them meeting in Albany. Okay, so he's going to meet her in Albany. They're going to go to dinner and whatever. So he says, but I've got JD with me. Okay, so I'm going to have JD. And Trinity Poague says, that's fine, bring JD, I want to see JD too, and so bring JD, and so they meet in Albany and go to a couple of places, go get some food, and go to Sephora, the makeup store, and some other things. And then they're leaving there, and he's going to come with her to Americus Saturday night, January 13th, 2024. And they haven't even gotten to Americus, okay? They hadn't even gotten to Americus before she begins texting her roommate, Paris Permort. And she says to Paris at 9:28 p.m. that night, she says to Paris something to the effect of, are you going to be, Paris worked nights. She worked nights at Magnolia Manor. And so she wasn't at the dorm. And so Ms. Poague texted her and said, are you coming back in the morning? Somehow I got stuck with JD. Okay, because JD was coming up here with his dad. And she says, he made me feel bad because it's late and JD's being fussy, so he asked if they could stay. Well, that's what she's telling the roommate. I think the evidence will be that that's not in fact what happened. Because they're in Albany, right? He can go back to Colquitt, which is 40 miles away, and she can come to Americus, which is 40 miles away. But she wants him to come to Americus, so he's coming to Americus, and she's complaining to the roommate because JD's going to be there. Because JD's going to be in Americus with him. She texts Paris, her roommate. I say roommate, sweet mate. You'll see the breakup of the room. You go in the door and there's a sink and a bathroom and a little lobby area and then 2 rooms. Okay, so she texts Paris and she says, I can't do being around JD anymore. He hates me and I hate him. It's what she's telling Paris even while she's driving to Americus with the child in her car. She put the child in her car and Jay was following them up here. So they get here. And Paris wants to see the child. She's seen him. She's met him several times, when he was up here, and she adored him. She thought that he was, the sweetest little thing in the world, and so she wanted to see the child. So she says, she's gonna come over there, and she's, she says, I want to come see my child, and Ms. Poague says, you want me to stop by your work, and Paris says, no, I'll come to the dorm in a little while. When I have a break, I'll come. And so she does. She goes over there a little after they get there. They get to the dorm that night, a little after 10, and then right after that, just a few minutes after that, Paris comes to the dorm, visits with the child for a few minutes, and then leaves and goes back to work. Later that night, Trinity Poague texted Paris and said, is it okay if I sleep in your room? She says, I just need a break. I need a mental break. JD isn't asleep, and Jay is knocked out all over the bed, and I didn't want to play the TV in there, etc. That's about 11:30, 11:45 or so on Saturday night, January 13th. She tells Paris, Paris says, why don't you wake him up and tell him to help get JD to sleep? And Trinity Poague says to Paris, she says, I did, and he just put him beside him and let him roll off the bed. That's what she tells Paris. I think that message was at, you will hear, 11:57 p.m. Now, the sleeping arrangements in that room where there was an air mattress, okay, and the air mattress was blown up, and it was at the end of the bed, foot of the bed, of Miss Poague's bed, and Ms. Poague and the child were sleeping on the air mattress, and Jay was sleeping on her bed. And so when she talks a bit about the child, quote, rolled off the bed, she later clarifies in a subsequent message the next afternoon to Paris. She says, back up. Paris says, what? Yeah? And she goes, it's fine. He's okay. He's fine. And not only does she say he's okay, he's fine, but she has her phone out and she takes some short videos of the child after the child has supposedly fallen off of the bed. And the child is sitting up and he's calm and he's quiet and looks like a normal, sleepy little kid, who's sort of playing with, moving his hands around, playing with Miss Poague, and looks for all the world just, like everything is perfectly okay. There's no bruises, there's no marks on him, there's no anything. There weren't any bruises on him when he got here, okay, like on his face or on his body. There weren't any marks, wasn't suffering from any kind of medical condition, wasn't in need of medical care or anything else, okay, when he had gotten here with his daddy. But she says to Paris, she goes, he's fine, he's okay. And the next day she clarifies and she goes, Paris says, I thought you said he rolled off the bed. And she says, she says, first she says, I don't know. I was asleep. I don't know if he fell off a bed or didn't fall off a bed, is what she tells Paris. A few hours after she told Paris he rolled off the bed. Then she tells Paris, when Paris asks about it again, says, did he fall off the bed last night or not? And she says, yeah. She says, but that was only off the air mattress, and the air mattress wasn't that far from the ground. And then, of course, you'll see there is an air mattress that's in the room. I mean, by the time the room is searched and photographed and so forth, the air mattress, before Jay Williams had left the room that Sunday morning, the air mattress was folded up, put in the closet, etc. So in any event, to get back to that night, she had texted Paris and said he fell off the bed, etc. But the child's up. She takes videos. He's fine. He's calm. He's playing doesn't have a mark on him, doesn't appear to be in any distress whatsoever. He went to bed that night, slept all night long that night, okay? Slept until 9:30 or 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, the 14th. He woke up and, okay, I have a 4-year-old grandson and I might do this, okay? So I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with this, okay? But this is what the child was given to eat, okay? When he woke up on Sunday morning, it was Fritos, Twisty Fritos, the twirly chips, Fritos chips, and Mountain Dew in his sippy cup, okay? But that's what the child has, and the child is sitting in a chair. There's one of those like saucer-style chairs, you know, like, big round thing sits on a frame, you know, and the child is in the chair, put in the chair, and is sitting there eating Fritos and drinking Mountain Dew and watching TV, and everything is fine. Jay Williams left. They were going to get lunch. He ordered pizza, okay? He left the dorm, and you're going to see a video that just shows him, it's just a few seconds of the video, but it's just video from the dorm, and you'll see, like, you'll be able to make notes of the times that people came and went at the dorm. But he left, I think it was 11:55, 11:56 or something like that, Sunday morning, to go to Walmart to get some drinks and to go pick up a pizza for food. When he left, his son was in good health. He was gone 35 or 36 minutes. As he was coming back, he gets a call from Trinity Poague, who says something to the effect of, "I don't know what happened, but he's not breathing." And so Jay Williams pulls up to the dorm, and he goes into the dorm, and you'll see him. He's got a Walmart bag and a Pizza Hut box in his hands, and he goes through the door, and when he gets to the room, she's holding his baby, and he said, the child appeared to be in great distress. He tossed the pizza on the bed. He dropped the Walmart bags on the floor. He picked the baby up and he took off. He rushed out the door with the baby, headed to Phoebe Sumter, to the emergency room. The child was so sick at that point that the child was throwing up on him. May have started throwing up when he was in the dorm, in the room. I think what you hear is Jay Williams will testify. I mean, there's some evidence the child might have thrown up, like as they were going out the door. Jay Williams will testify that he doesn't really know when he started throwing up, but it was like in the car. It was when he, threw up on his clothes, etc. Gets to the emergency room. Not breathing. They take the child in. The child is is in grave distress at this point. There's no pulse. He's not, no heartbeat, no blood pressure, no breathing, no anything. And they take the child and start performing CPR, and I'll try. They were going to life flight him out to Dr. Bussman, who will testify in this case. Dr. Bussman testified he'd made arrangements with Eggleston Hospital in Atlanta, the Children's Hospital in Atlanta, for the child to go up there. They made arrangements. They were going to fly him, helicopter the child out, life flight to Eggleston. As soon as they could get him stable, they never were able to get him stable enough to fly. A little after 4 o'clock, about 3 hours after he had gotten to the hospital, J.D. Angelus took his last breath. This child that when he came to Americus from Colquitt on Saturday, didn't have a mark on him, didn't have any injury, wasn't in any distress. When Jay Williams left to go to pick up pizza, the child was sitting up, eating, not in any distress, didn't have a mark on him. But by the time the child got to the emergency room, after spending 35 minutes in that room with Trinity Poague, this is what the child had. He had fresh bruising on his face. There was a fresh bruise, a visible, immediate, a sort of immediately visible bruise on the right side. Right side of his forehead. There was a bruise on the right side of his neck. There was a bruise on his cheek. There was a much bigger bruise on his other cheek. And you'll hear some testimony. You'll hear some testimony from the medical examiner and maybe others about what kind of a bruise this was. It's what they call a pattern bruise. Okay, it's something that when a doctor, when a medical examiner, somebody who's trained and experienced, looks at it, they say, I know what caused that bruise because it's like a bruise and there's a little break, in the skin, whatever, where it's not bruised, and there's another bruise, and it's called a pattern bruise because it's something that is known as the kind of bruise you get from a hard slap to the face, or from this kind of a thing, this kind of a pinch to the face. So there's that bruise on the left side. He's bleeding from his brain. There are bruises, multiple bruises, 4, 5, or more fresh bruises on the top of this child's head. Okay? Here and here and here and here, and in the temporal parietal region, which I think means right here, okay? And up here at the top of his head. And that's not all. On the back of his head, this bone right here at the bottom of the bottom of the skull, okay, that sort of dish shape that kind of goes in, okay, sort of naturally protected by your shoulders and by the crown of your head. This bone here at the bottom of his skull, the occipital bone, is fractured. Not only is the occipital bone fractured, but he has a massive hemorrhage in that location at the back of his head. A hemorrhage that was causing a hematoma, collection of blood, that was so fresh and so immediate that the people at the emergency room are like, you can feel it. You can put your hands on it, you can feel the blood built up right here at the back of JD's head. That is an injury that I believe the evidence will show is referred to as catastrophic. It's an acute injury. It's not an injury that happened hours before or days before. It's not an injury that could have happened the night before. It's not an injury that could have happened realistically. It's not an injury that could have happened from a child falling off of a bed or falling out of a chair or anything else. It's an injury that essentially requires applied force to that particular part of the head. And it's an injury that could literally only have occurred within a few minutes' time before this child was presented at the emergency room. Couldn't have happened last night. Couldn't have happened 4 hours ago, or 5 hours ago, or even 2 or 3 hours ago. It can't be, to the moment clear about when the injury occurred. But I think what you would hear across the board from the medical testimony in this case, you're going to hear not only from the medical examiner, but you're also going to hear from both of the treating physicians that treated this child at Phoebe Sumter Medical Center, at the ER, in the emergency room. That's Dr. Busman and Dr. Olek. And they're going to say, that injury didn't happen before. That injury had to have happened in a very brief time, just a few moments before the child presented at the emergency room. And believe it or not, that's still not all. In addition to the multiple impacts, the multiple points of impact, the multiple injuries that was causing his brain to bleed here and here and here and here and here, in addition to that, J.D. Angelus had a massive laceration of his liver, okay, which is down here, this part of your back, where his liver is. And there's a massive laceration of the liver. And the laceration of the liver is to the right lobe of the liver. This is the lobe of the liver that basically is away from the front of the body. Okay, not that happens from falling forward or landing on the front part of your body. It's an injury that's off back here. It's causing him to bleed profusely in his abdomen. Okay. The evidence will be, the medical testimony that you'll hear is going to be pretty clear, though, that this is not the injury that killed the child. Okay, the injury that killed the child is the injury to his head. There's really not going to be any medical dispute about that. But there's nonetheless a massive laceration of the liver. It's not a chronic condition. It's not a condition that could have built up over time. It's not blood that would have collected over some long period of time. Okay? It's an injury that occurred acutely, that occurred sometime in the minutes or hours before the child was at the emergency room. Some of the injuries, like the bruises, for instance, what the testimony will be is that they're acute, they're fresh. But nobody can really age a bruise, okay? They can't look at a bruise and say that bruise is less than an hour old, okay? An hour-old bruise doesn't look much different than an 8-hour-old bruise, okay? The one injury, the single injury that can really be aged in this case, that the doctors can take a position, a firm position, and say this injury had to have occurred in this time frame, was the catastrophic injury to the fracture of the occipital bone, the hemorrhage, and the occipital bone was fractured so hard, okay, the extent of the fracture was significant enough, okay, that it caused the skull, this child's skull, to separate, okay, on this side of his head. Okay, like, everybody's seen pictures of skull, skeletons type of thing, and the skull is 4 or 5 different pieces, okay, and those pieces you hear they're laced together, okay, like the bone of the skull laces together, okay, and it's something called, the one that's in question in this case is called the lambdoidal suture, okay, and the suture is just where the pieces of the skull join together. Okay, and the impact to the back of this child's head was so severe that it caused the lambdoidal suture, which is up here on the scalp, caused it to separate. Okay, that's the injury that can be dated in time. But the others, the bruises, the injury to the liver, are all consistent with that same time frame, and the evidence will be that they're all acute, they're all fresh, and you're going to see pictures of this child from just a few hours before where there aren't any of these injuries, okay? There aren't any of these injuries on him. There's no injuries to his face. There's no marks on his face. There's no knots on his head. There's no swelling of his abdomen. There's no vomiting. There's no illness that occurs or is associated with head trauma. The only time that is present is at the conclusion of what was essentially the last 35 minutes of this child's life, when he was in the sole company of the defendant, Trinity Poague. You know, I'll tell you what evidence they don't have. You know, you're not gonna hear, I don't, nobody saw what she did, okay? Nobody saw what she did to inflict these injuries, okay? There's not a video from inside of her dorm room. And, you know, I think you may hear, you know, some hypotheses, you know, could this have happened? Could that have happened? Could this have caused this injury? Could that have caused this injury? And so forth. But the bottom line is, nobody knows for sure what happened, except that J.D. Angelus was the victim of severe and sudden head trauma and abdominal trauma. Something that they will, I think that the phrase that you may hear from one or more of these doctors is something called inflicted trauma. Okay? Inflicted trauma as opposed to accidental trauma. There are some earmarks, there are some distinctions that the clinical presentation of a patient, there's some distinctions between patients who present with accidental injuries and patients who present with injuries that are the result of inflicted or applied trauma. You're going to hear the story of the last few days and the last few minutes of J.D. Angelus' short life. And you're going to hear about the details of his horrible death. And ultimately, when all the evidence is in and the case is closed, I'll come back and talk to you again. And what I will ask you for then is simply this: that as a jury, that you collectively say, we are going to hold accountable, we are going to hold responsible the person, the only person who could have inflicted these injuries on this 18-month-old baby. And the way you will show that accountability and make that finding of accountability and responsibility is by returning a verdict of guilty on the charges that the state has brought against this defendant. Thank you.